Last Sunday, we looked at one of the stories about Abraham and Sarah, and this morning I want to skip over a couple of generations, if you know that story, to look at the story of their great-grandsons, the 12 sons of Jacob, of which Joseph is the 11th and is the primary focus of the rest of the story. And it's a long story. It begins all the way back in the 30th chapter of Genesis and continues through the end of Genesis, so 20 chapters. And once again, this morning, I'm going to focus just on one section of the story, which is the climax of it. Now, we all know, I think, Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat, right, from Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical. My preaching professor, Joey Jeter, called this story one of the greatest stories, not just of the Bible, but of all literature. He says, it has everything you need for a bestseller at the checkout stand in the supermarket. It has mystery, heroism, treachery, sex, and adventure. It even has something you won't find in a supermarket, good writing. So you just might want to read it yourself sometime. Now, you may recall Joseph in this story, in the first part, is anything but a hero. Right? He's more of an egotistic snob, always boasting. Dad liked him best. You want to remember Tommy Smothers, right? You know, Mommy liked me best, right? Only here, Tommy is just being funny. Joseph just comes off as a bit of a jerk, showing off his Technicolor Dreamcoat, telling his brothers about his dreams that made all of them inferior to him. And finally, they've had enough. Right? So they plot to kill him. Only Reuben, who is the oldest of the 12 brothers, and therefore the one who should be most offended by his younger brother's boast, intercedes to have Joseph thrown into a pit rather than killed, intending to come back later in the night to rescue him. But of course, you know, that doesn't happen because Judah, who's the fourth of the 12 brothers, conspires with his remaining brothers to sell Joseph into slavery to Egyptian slave traders. And he is taken away before Reuben can intercede to save him. And once in Egypt, Joseph becomes known for his interpretation of dreams. And he finds his way into the court of the Pharaoh and interprets the dream of the Pharaoh about a coming famine. And Pharaoh thereby places Joseph in charge of preparing for that famine. And so for 7 years, Joseph organizes the storage of grain that then, of course, becomes indispensable when that famine comes that lasts for another 7 years. Well, we're 2 years into this famine, and of course, it's region-wide. It's not just in Egypt. And so Jacob and the rest of the family are starving. And so Jacob sends 10 of his sons, all except Benjamin, the youngest of the 12, to Egypt in search of food. Well, Joseph, without ever revealing himself to his brothers, because it's the last thing they expect, right? He perceives, he tricks them into revealing that Benjamin, they have one more brother, Benjamin. So he tells them, well, you're going to have to go back home to get Benjamin, to bring him here before I'm going to help you. So they do. And then Joseph grants their request, still without revealing his identity. And now he tricks them with a sort of test. He has his servants place a silver cup, his silver cup, into a sack of grain carried by Benjamin. And then when the 11 brothers begin their journey back home, Joseph sends his chief steward to confront the brothers with this theft of the cup. And when the cup is found, surprising everyone, and most of all Benjamin, right, the 11 are brought back to Joseph, who then tells them that the one who stole his cup is going to have to remain as a slave. But the others are free to go. Now you can immediately see what's happening here, right? This is payback time. It's tit for tat. Joseph is responding with his own treachery against the treachery against him. Now, we can presume that once the brothers have left, that he will reveal to his younger brother who he really is, and all will be well. Only that's not what happens. Instead, Judah. Now, you remember Judah, back earlier, right? Judah was the one who's arranged, who tricked, sold him into slavery. Judah pleads with Joseph, because if they do not return with Benjamin, he says, it will kill their father. Because Benjamin, he begins to tell this story as if Joseph doesn't know it, Benjamin had a brother of the same mother. Now, if you know the whole story, their mother was Rachel. Rachel was the woman that Abraham fell in love with and arranged with his soon-to-be father-in-law for Rachel in marriage, but his father-in-law tricks him and gives him Leah, who's the older of the two sisters, because he knows he's going to have trouble marrying off Leah. And so then he has to remain another 7 years in order to get Rachel. So he's got 2 wives, 2 handmaidens, has children by all of them. Poor, don't you just feel bad for, poor Jacob, That's the musical I'd like to see. I don't know why no one's made that one into me. But anyway, so Benjamin and Joseph are full brothers. The rest are half brothers. And Judah says, his other brother, Joseph, was taken from their father, and therefore Jacob cannot bear to lose Benjamin as well, the only remaining son of his most beloved wife. So, Judah says, take me, and I will be the slave. Let Benjamin go home to his father with his brothers. So now we come again to the rest of the story from chapter 45, 1 through 20. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, send everyone away from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come closer to me. And they came closer. He said, I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in this land for these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So if it was not for you who sent me here, but God, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry, go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And now your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my own mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father how greatly I am honored in Egypt and all that you have seen. Hurry, bring my father down here. Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, while Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, and all that his brothers talked with him. The emotion in this story, it's just overwhelming. When the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. Pharaoh and his servants were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your animals, go back to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me, so that I may give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you may enjoy the fat of the land. You are further charged to say, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives, and bring your father and come. Give no thought to your possessions, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. Once again, it's this classic Middle Eastern hospitality that's so beautiful. Well, Joey Jeter uses this story to contemplate on the difference between the negative and the positive form of the Golden Rule. Now, the negative form dates back older than Christianity. It goes back 4,000 years in Chinese traditions that says, do not do to others as you do not want done to yourself. Google simplified that into the slogan of Google is do no harm, right? And Reuben represents this negative form of the golden rule. When his brothers want to kill Joseph, he intercedes to save his life, choosing the lesser of two evils. And in his sermon, Joey says, this is one way to peace, right? As it was summed up in a poster I had on my wall during my college days, let the Christians of the world resolve to not kill one another. Right? It'd be a good start, right? We would just say, well, let's not kill one another, right? Do no harm. Jesus, on the other hand, instinctively knows that's not enough, right? It may be the basis of law, right, preventing us from doing harm, but it will never go far enough to save us. It can save us from being our worst, but it cannot help us to be our best. Or to put it differently, it might keep us from hell, but it won't get us into heaven. The way of Christ goes beyond doing no harm to actively do good, like that campaign being launched here in Eugene to choose kindness. And thus, Jesus makes the golden rule not about what we don't do, but about what we do do. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. And this is the second way of peace, and is demonstrated by Judah in the second half of the story, perhaps to compensate for his previous treachery when he offers himself now to spare his little brother. And take note, Jesus says that the genealogy of Jesus, pay attention to the genealogy of Jesus. The genealogy of Jesus in Matthew and Luke passes precisely through not Joseph, not Reuben, not Benjamin, not any of the 11, but precisely through Judah. This is the way of peace to which we are called. The way of Christ, as Paul puts it in his letter to the Philippians, did not count equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, as Judah here offers, and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Well, as fate would have it, in preparation for his reflections on this story, Joey took his wife to see the musical. Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And after they left this very well done production in Hollywood, they began discussing this idea he was developing about the two ways to peace, as shown in the negative by Reuben and in the positive by Judah. And they got into their car, and they were talking as they got into the queue for a left-hand turn onto Hollywood Boulevard. And Joey says, you need to know, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is to make a left-hand turn on Hollywood Boulevard on a Saturday night. And so they waited, and they waited, and they waited patiently for their turn, as one car at best makes a left-hand turn with each light. Finally, their turn comes when alongside of them, on the right-hand side, the sports car comes speeding past, whips into the lane in front of them, backs up into the crosswalk right there in front of the intersection, blocking their way, taking their turn. Well, Joey says he did what any good, self-respecting California driver would do. He rammed him, right? Just a little friendly way, let him know, here I am. Well, windows rolled down, words and gestures are exchanged, and they were not friendly ones. Fortunately, the light changed before further harm could be done to vehicle or persons, and the sports car sped off. And Jeters finally got their turn and continued their way in silence, Joey with his teeth clenched, just seething with anger. His wife just quietly says, "And which way to peace was that?" That's why we preachers, by the way, do not discuss these ideas with our spouses, right? Now, there are undoubtedly many, many more lessons we might learn from the tale of Joseph and his brothers about forgiveness and reconciliation, about telling the truth about the bonds of family, and even matters of foreign policy. When you realize we're talking here about two nations, two peoples that have been at each other's throats for most of 3,000 years, and the story is told within the context of that conflict years later. right? The Egyptians first here are saved by the wisdom of a Hebrew slave, and then the family of Jacob that becomes dependent on the willingness of Egypt to share of their supplies of grain. So in other words, mutually independent, mutually saving each other, right? It's a very intriguing story. So this is the lesson that I take above all the rest. The continuation of the biblical story, right? The exodus of Moses when led the people out of Egypt. The establishment of Israel in the promised land. The appearance of the prophets. The birth of a peasant in a Bethlehem stable. All of that story, right, would never have happened had not Joseph and his brothers recognized each other as brothers once again. Now, maybe the story would have continued in a different way. It'd be a different story, right? Because there are all kinds of possibilities available to God. But this I know. It is on the foundation of that forgiveness and reconciliation of these brothers that the rest of the story is built. And please note that when Genesis comes to a close, the descendants of Jacob, the Hebrew people, the citizens of Egypt are living peacefully side by side. So the reconciliation here of the sons of Jacob is not just about the good fortunes of one family. It's about Hebrews and Arabs living and working together. It's about the welfare, peace, and harmony of nations. This story is so much more than a good story. It is a vision for the realm of God where all are well fed, treated with dignity, where all share a common destiny. There's an old Hasidic tale that I think sums up the story very well. A great teacher of the law asked by his students, "How can you tell when night becomes day?" The first student responded, "Is it when you can see the break on the horizon and you can tell the difference between the sky and the land?" "No," said the rabbi, "it's not it." Well, the second then asked, "Is it when you can see the shape in the distance and you can recognize whether it is a person or an animal?" "No," said the rabbi, "that's not it." Well, then asked the third, "Is it when you can recognize that one who is approaching you as a friend or a foe?" "No," said the rabbi, "that's not it either." And so the rabbi said, "When you can look in the face of another and see a brother or a sister, then you know night has become day." In a time when our capacity to do harm, be it with guns or bombs, chemical weapons or concrete walls, personal deeds or government decisions, seem to be so much greater than our capacity to do good, human survival may well depend upon our ability to see in the face of a stranger a brother or a sister. The farmer who grows our food and the farm worker who picks it is a brother or a sister. And it matters not whether a family lives in the Bahamas or in Alabama. They are all members of the same family when their homes are destroyed by hurricane or flood. The child orphaned by the war in Afghanistan and the soldier called to fight in a land far from home share the same blood. See, I love this story because Joseph not only saves his family, because who wouldn't do the same? He also saves the people of Egypt. And would that we would remember and tell more stories like this, not about one nation's brutality toward another, but of our common humanity and our shared destiny. Like the story of Mamadou Gassama, an African migrant who scaled the outside of a building to save a French child on the 5th floor of their apartment building. Or the Mexican children and the American children playing on a teeter-totter across our southern border, right? Or Oregon soldier Daniel Kim, born in Korea, who is one of the 900 undocumented dreamers currently serving in our military, at times risking their lives for a country that will not give them a path to citizenship. In 2011, Antonio Diaz Chacon witnessed a 6-year-old girl being whisked off the street by a stranger in a van in his hometown of Albuquerque. He jumped into his own truck with no concern for his safety, chased the van down, forced it off the road, rescued that 6-year-old girl from certain death, if not worse, right? He was honored, here pictured with a plaque he received from the mayor of Albuquerque. Chacon gave up his own dream of becoming an American citizen because of the many roadblocks, and instead he became an American hero, pictured here with his American wife and American-born daughter, even as he remains undocumented. This is a picture taken in January this year from the memorial service of Juan Carlos Salgado. Salgado was an undocumented immigrant who was killed attempting to cross a dark highway near his home in Houston. 2 weeks prior to that, however, Juan and another man were the first people on the scene of a car accident on that very same stretch of highway involving a drunk driver and a police cruiser. The cruiser burst into flames with 2 officers trapped inside. Juan busted a window with his bare fist, pulling one officer out while the other gentleman pulled out the other. Being undocumented, he feared being discovered. He left the scene before the first responders arrived. And now, 2 weeks later, 3 of Houston's top brass from the police department came to his funeral. "We are heartbroken," the assistant chief told the family, "because we did not have the opportunity to thank him while he was alive." And please note, the officers here are dressed in their dress blues, pressed pants, tie, polished patent leather shoes. It is the dress they use when they go to the service of a fallen officer. I share these stories because I think we hear too many of the other stories of bad guys who happened also to be foreigners. Well, guess what? There are just as many bad guys, right, who are not foreigners. In fact, almost all of the mass shootings in this country in the last decade have been done by white men on several occasions, targeting communities of color, making them disproportionately victims of mass shootings, as we saw in that shooting in Walmart in El Paso. So what we need to hear are more stories, I think, on the other side of the unsung heroes who also happen to be from other cultures, the true Good Samaritans, who in spite of being discriminated against, as Samaritans surely were, still choose to follow the golden rule, to do good like Judah, willing to sacrifice their own interests for the sake of another. They are the ones who most show us the path of peace, the way of Christ. When we see in the face of a stranger, a brother or sister, night becomes day, and we will know the realm of God is here now.